How you doing? We got a big one today. Dracula, the #1 most recognized horror story in probably all of human history. Dracula, written by Bram Stoker in the 1890s. Here's a copy of the original artwork, which there is none, because in the 1890s they didn't really do that. So, when movies started becoming a thing in the 1920s, we had silent films. The first adaptation of Dracula came out in Germany, known as Nosferatu, because they did not get permission to make Dracula into a film. So they changed the name. They called it Nosferatu, and they changed the name of the vampire to Count Orlok instead of Count Dracula. And they altered his appearance and made him look like a crazy monster instead of a regular guy. But the Stoker family didn't like that, and they actually sued and won. So this was a lost film for a while, and then much later it was rediscovered and restored. So you can see Nosferatu in a number of places today, if you can handle getting through a silent film. So when was it first officially made into a movie? We've got Dracula in 1931. Universal Pictures made Dracula with Bela Lugosi, who you see there on the poster. And this was a giant hit. I guess it was a risk at the time it was made. And Universal did really well with it. So then they went on to make Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Wolf Man, Creature of the Black Lagoon, the Black Cat, and many other horror films, especially in the 30s and into the 40s, when it then died down. So this version of Dracula is alright. It's a classic version, but compared to most of those other movies I just mentioned, it's pretty slow. In 1931, they weren't really putting that much music in the movies other than in the credits. So it feels like a lot of dead air. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like stiff. So that's that one. This had many sequels. We had, I think, Son of Dracula, Dracula's Daughter. Then we had some crossovers. We had House of Frankenstein, which featured Dracula in it. We had House of Dracula. We even had Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein's Monster, which Dracula made an appearance in as well. Most of the time it wasn't Bela Lugosi. I think he only actually did Dracula twice in the first and last movies of the Universal run, played by other actors at other points. So, as I said, it kind of died down. The horror kind of died down. World War II came. People weren't really trying to watch horror. And then in the 50s, we had a big spike in sci-fi alien movies. And Godzilla came along. And we had giant monster movies coming out of Japan, and then some American copycats. Well, after some time goes on, in 1956 or 57, Hammer Films from the UK came and hit the scene with a remake of Frankenstein, or I should say a re-adaptation. Universal didn't give them permission, so they had to change the way the monster looked, but it was a big hit. So much of a hit that Universal changed their mind and decided to turn over the rights to all their monster movies, including Dracula, the Mummy, Wolfman, and so on. So in 1958, we get Hammer's version of Dracula. This time it's in color. Christopher Lee is Dracula, Peter Cushing is Van Helsing, and it's a lot more fun, in my opinion, than Universal Dracula. Problem with this one is it doesn't go by the book at all. It barely goes by the book at all. In the book, Jonathan Harker is alive, I believe, for the entire book. And is fighting Dracula. Also in the book, he doesn't know that Dracula is a vampire until later on. In the book, Jonathan Harker is a real estate agent who goes to Transylvania to sell Dracula some property. Then he returns to London when he figures out Dracula is a vampire, and Dracula ends up basically following him back and causing problems in London. That's the original story. In the Hammer version, the entire thing takes place in Romania. Jonathan Harker lives like in the same town as Dracula and goes to his house specifically to destroy him. Meanwhile, Dracula kills him like right at the beginning of the movie, and most of the rest of the movie is Van Helsing, played by Peter Cushing, hunting Dracula down. So it really focuses on Van Helsing more than anything else. This spawned 8 sequels, and I think 5 of them had Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, and 6 of them had Christopher Lee as Dracula. Not all 9 films had both. So that was very successful. The last one was in 1974, so we're going to talk more about some of these Hammer Dracula films in other videos. But this was a big time Dracula. This was the first time Dracula had fangs in an English-speaking Dracula movie. I should mention that a few years before this, in I think 1953 or 1954, there was a Turkish adaptation of Dracula, which I did try to watch, but it's really rough. But Dracula did have fangs in that Turkish Dracula. So, anyway, I read an interview with Christopher Lee saying that he liked playing Dracula, but he didn't like the fact that the story was changed so much from the book. So, in 1970, he got a chance to go to this movie, El Conde Dracula. Now it says El Conde Dracula because it's actually a Spanish movie. Actually, it's a 5-country co-production movie. It's Spain, Italy, West Germany, Liechtenstein, and the UK. Now, actually, Christopher Lee is in this, and I'm going to show you. It actually came out in Germany, West Germany first, with this poster, and that translates to Night When Dracula Awakes. And then here's the international poster with Christopher Lee actually on the poster. So it's released in the English-speaking countries as Count Dracula, although it didn't even hit the United States until 1973. But it landed in Germany and Spain in 1970, so that's why we're talking about it here. So, this one actually follows the book much more closely. We've got the whole real estate agent thing. Jonathan Harker does not die at the beginning of the movie. And also, Christopher Lee as Dracula starts out very old, which happens in the book, and every time he drains someone's life force, he gets younger and younger in appearance. He also travels, via ship from Transylvania to London. Although the movie is shot in Spain and Italy, but you can't, that's besides the point. So, this was directed by Jesús Franco, also known as Jesse Franco, when he wanted to sound like he was English. It's the same director from a movie we talked about earlier, The Bloody Judge, which Christopher Lee was also in. You may remember Christopher Lee was in 9 movies in 1970. I think 6 of them were horror. So this is the second one we're talking about. We did The Bloody Judge, we're doing this. He's also in 2 other Dracula movies we're going to talk about later. And a few non-horror movies as well. So, the other thing a couple other things about the movie I wanted to mention was that in this one we have an actor that we recognize from Dorian Gray and Witches Tortured to Death, Mr. Strom. He's playing Van Helsing in this movie, and the 2 of them do pretty well. You can also hear the score in the background, which was done by Bruno Nicolai. He also did the score for The Bloody Judge. So he worked with Jesús Franco regularly, or somewhat regularly. Jesús Franco actually directed over 100 movies. So out of those 100+ movies, I don't know how many Bruno was working on, but probably at least 5 or 6. He also worked with Sergio Martino, who we're going to talk more about in 1971 when he does The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, which is a great giallo. Anyway, this movie, in some ways, I like it more than The Hammer Dracula, and in some ways, I don't like it as much. One way I like it more is this score. I think it sounds really good. And if you keep listening, there's that part right there. It comes back throughout the movie. It really sticks in your head. And in between this catchy hook, we'll get other types of music to match the moods of the movie, but it keeps coming back to this, which I like. The other thing I liked about it was that it stuck close to the book. In the book, the whole first third of the book takes place in Transylvania, in Dracula's castle. And I love that part of the book. I really like that part of this movie. After that, the book really slows down when they go back to London. There's a whole lot of characters which were omitted for the Hammer version, and they're brought back for this version. That includes Reinfeld, who is an insane person that eats bugs, specifically flies, but also a dragonfly in the movie. And he eats flies, and Van Helsing is trying to figure him out. There's also Dr. Seward, who was omitted from the Hammer version. He works closely with Van Helsing. And there's also Quincy Adams, I believe the character's name is, who didn't appear in any previous version either. So we got a lot more going on here, but here's the problem. There's a lot of parts where there is no music, and it's a lot of dead air. The whole thing is kind of wooden and stiff. When Christopher Lee is in there, it's pretty great, but there's a lot of parts of the movie where he's not there, and it just really, really slows down. And even worse than that is the fact that the cinematography is, in my opinion, so bad. There's a lot of these. They did these in some of the less good giallos, but there's these like quick zooms. I guess it was supposed to be like suspenseful or surprising or something, where it's zoomed out and then all of a sudden it quickly zooms in really close to the person's face that's talking or that is being emphasized. They do it so many times in this movie, it's like almost like a joke. So you really have to get around that in order to appreciate this. But the fact that it took from the 1890s until 1970 to finally get a reasonably close adaptation of this great book is commendable. So that's why I give this one a 7 out of 10. There's a lot of Dracula movies that came before it and a lot of Dracula movies that came after it. Another issue is that a lot of these actors didn't speak the same language because it was a 5-country production. And the movie I watched was in English. Christopher Lee does his own English, and so does our boy Mr. Strom. But everyone else is not doing their own English because either they couldn't speak English or their accent was so thick that it got dubbed over. And you know, I'm glad that I don't think we do that in movies today. But at the time, there was really a strive to be in English, and so we get this poor dubbing that we get in a lot of Italian movies. It happened here as well. Another thing that's interesting to me, and I certainly didn't watch multiple versions of the movie, but there's a different writer for each language of the script. Jesús Franco did the Spanish version. There's a different writer for the English version, for the German version, for the Italian version. So that's the first time I've noticed that happening, and so the fact that there's a different writer for each script probably makes it better in those other languages. The movie's certainly not good enough for me to go through and watch multiple languages of the movie. I might watch the beginning and the very end again, but as far as rewatch value, The Hammer Dracula has a much better rewatch value. Especially the way that Dracula dies at the end of that movie is really cool. Has some really good effects. Here, we have fire superimposed over Dracula's face. I wonder how Christopher Lee felt about that, considering he basically turned into a pile of dust that looked really cool in 1958. And in 1970, he just had to kind of like close his eyes and have some fire put over his face. Didn't look very good at all. I mean, by 1970, they definitely could have done some kind of stunt fire. We've seen that. But anyway, it was Spain, and I did read that Franco ran out of money well before the production was over. Plus, he was already working on other movies. He did 3 movies, at least 3, maybe, I think he did 4 movies in 1970. 3 of them were horror. The Bloody Judge and also Eugenie, which I haven't been able to find anywhere for a reasonable price. But that's it for this one. We're going to talk about 2 more Dracula movies in 1970. We've only got a few movies left. So 2 of them are Dracula movies, and they both feature Christopher Lee. So we'll see you next time.